I'm 52 years old. 6 months ago, I was delivering Chinese food in a dented Toyota Corolla when my entire life cracked open in a way I still can't fully explain. Some mornings, I wake up convinced it was all a stress-induced hallucination, that if I blink hard enough, I'll be back in my old kitchen, coffee brewing, laptop open, preparing for another executive meeting. But then I feel the weight in my chest, and I remember. I remember the cold soup eaten straight from the container, the motel room that smelled like bleach and old regret, the sound of a stranger crying through the wall at night, and realizing I was listening because I didn't want to hear my own thoughts. A year earlier, I had been someone people respected. I'd spent 25 years climbing the ranks at Caldwell Logistics, starting as a warehouse supervisor and working my way up to director of operations. 6 figures, suburban house outside Boston, a career built brick by brick, shift by shift. My children, Emma and Marcus, were everything I'd done right in a life full of compromises. Emma was finishing pharmacy school at Boston University. Marcus had just opened his own accounting practice at 33. We weren't rich, but we were stable, proud, whole. And then, in the span of 1 week, I lost everything. My job, my reputation, my home, my savings. I was accused of stealing over $3 million from the company I'd helped build. Accused with documents so detailed, so precise, they nearly convinced me I'd somehow done it in my sleep. Security footage that malfunctioned. Digital signatures I'd never signed. Warehouse entries at 3 a.m. when I'd been asleep in my own bed. They told me to resign quietly. They told me to think of my children. I refused. By Friday, I was escorted out of the building by security. By Tuesday, I was in handcuffs in front of my neighbors. By Wednesday, my name was poison in every logistics firm in New England. And by month 4, I was delivering lo mein and fried rice to people who used to call me ma'am with respect, now unable to look me in the eye. I thought that was the bottom. I was wrong. Because the night everything truly changed didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened on a rainy December evening at the front door of a mansion when an old man looked at my face and collapsed to his knees and said my father's name. Before my life became a cautionary headline whispered behind closed doors, it was ordinary, steady, earned. I'm a woman who learned early how to survive by being reliable. I grew up in a small apartment in Boston with a mother who worked double shifts at Boston General Hospital and came home smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion. My father died in a construction accident when I was barely 3. I don't remember his voice. I remember the photograph my mother kept in a drawer, him in a hard hat, smiling like the future was already his. My mother never remarried. She didn't have time for grief, let alone romance. She raised me alone, teaching me that stability wasn't glamorous, but it was sacred. You showed up, you didn't complain, you didn't gamble with what you couldn't afford to lose. I carried that lesson into everything. At 27, I started at Caldwell Logistics as a warehouse floor coordinator. Steel-toe boots, early mornings, coffee gone cold by 7 a.m. I learned the company from the ground up. The smell of diesel, the sound of forklifts, the rhythm of loading bays. I stayed late, took calls no one else wanted, fixed problems before they became disasters. 25 years later, I was director of operations. I wasn't flashy, I didn't play politics well, but people trusted me. 47 employees reported directly to me. When shipments went missing or deadlines slipped, I fixed it. When someone's kid got sick, I covered their shift. Caldwell wasn't just my employer, it was a place I'd given my adult life to. Somewhere in the middle of all that, I married a man named Samuel. No, that's not right anymore. I married Samuel Mitchell, a man who loved ambition more than partnership. We met in our 20s. He was charming in the way people are when they want something badly. He dreamed big. Bigger houses, better cars, a life that looked impressive from the outside. I was the steady one, the planner, the saver. At first, we balanced each other. Then the cracks started showing. Nothing was ever enough for him. The house wasn't big enough. Vacations weren't extravagant enough. My promotions were expected, not celebrated. When I said no to things we couldn't afford, he called me small-minded. When I said yes, it was never the right yes. We divorced almost a decade ago. It was ugly at first. Resentment, accusations, silence stretched thin. But time dulled the sharpest edges, or so I thought. He drifted through relationships afterward. I stopped paying attention. I focused on my children. Emma, my daughter, was gentle but fierce in her own way. Smart, disciplined, compassionate. Pharmacy school at BU. Volunteering at Children's Hospital on weekends, even when she was exhausted. Marcus, my son, had my father's quiet intensity. Numbers made sense to him the way people didn't. He opened his own accounting practice at 33, the youngest CPA in his firm's history. Twice a month, we had Sunday dinners at my house. Nothing fancy. Pasta, roast chicken, laughter that made the walls feel warm. Emma teased me about dating again. Marcus pretended not to listen while watching everything. I told myself I was content. Then came the company gala. Caldwell Logistics always went all out. Ballroom at the Four Seasons, celebrity chefs, champagne flowing like the money never would for most of us. I hated those events, but I went because visibility mattered. That night, I was laughing with colleagues when Grace Caldwell walked in, and on her arm, my ex-husband, wearing a designer gown, diamonds at his throat, smiling like he'd already won something I didn't yet understand I was competing for. Grace introduced him as her fiancé, and in that moment, I felt something cold settle deep in my gut, because I knew that smile. I'd seen it before, right before my marriage ended, right before everything fell apart. After the gala, nothing exploded right away. That was the worst part. Life didn't shatter in a single dramatic moment. It began to tilt. Slowly, quietly, like a house settling on a cracked foundation. At work, people smiled the same way they always had. Meetings continued, emails flowed. On the surface, everything looked normal. But I felt it, in the pauses that lasted a second too long, in the way conversations stopped when I entered a room, in the sudden formality of interactions that used to be easy. And then he started showing up. Samuel began appearing at the office far more often than made sense for someone who was just visiting his fiancée. He'd arrive late morning, impeccably dressed, carrying a coffee he never drank, drifting through the executive floors like he belonged there. He always found a reason to pass by my department. "Oh, there you are," he'd say lightly, voice syrupy. "I was just telling Grace how proud I am of Emma. Pharmacy school, right? Such a smart girl." My skin would crawl. He talked about my children like he'd earned the right, like he'd been there for birthdays he missed, graduations he skipped, years he chose ambition over family. He attended meetings he had no business being in, sat beside Grace, whispered in her ear while staring straight at me across the table, eyes sharp, calculating, measuring. It felt deliberate, psychological, like a game where I didn't know the rules. Karen, my assistant, noticed it before I admitted it to myself. One evening, as the office emptied and the city lights flickered on outside the windows, she stood in my doorway, arms crossed tight against her chest. "Watch your back," she said quietly. I looked up from my laptop. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "He's been watching you all night, the way a cat watches a mouse. I've seen that look before. It never ends well." At home, the anxiety followed me. I slept lightly, woke up at 3 a.m, heart racing, convinced I'd forgotten something critical. I double-checked reports I'd already reviewed, reread emails I'd sent days ago. Perfection became my armor. Sunday dinner came, and my children noticed. "You're distracted," Marcus said, pushing his food around his plate. "What's going on at work?" I hesitated. I didn't want to worry them, but Emma saw through me. She always had. "Is it him?" I nodded. Marcus leaned back, jaw tight. "Mom, that man never does anything without an angle. Document everything. Emails, meetings, conversations. Trust me, This doesn't feel right. Emma agreed instantly. He missed 8 years of my life. Now he suddenly cares? No. I brushed it off, told myself they were being protective. That paranoia wouldn't help anyone. I wish I'd listened, because looking back now, every small moment was a warning I chose to ignore. My mother would have seen it immediately. Dorothy always said charm without conscience was the most dangerous thing in the world. She raised me to believe in people, but not blindly. Too trusting, she used to say, just like your father. She'd passed 5 years earlier, long before any of this happened. Cancer took her slowly, quietly. Sometimes I think that was a mercy. She didn't have to watch what came next. 3 months after the gala, on a Monday morning that felt no different from any other, my phone buzzed with a calendar alert. 7:30 a.m. Human Resources. Mandatory. That was the moment the ground finally gave way. Monday mornings at Caldwell usually began the same way. Coffee too hot, inbox too full, mind already racing ahead to problems that hadn't happened yet. That morning felt normal, which is why the email from Human Resources didn't register as danger at first. 7:30 a.m. Mandatory meeting. Conference room C. Early, but not unheard of. I straightened my blazer, grabbed my notebook, and walked down the hallway I'd walked for more than 2 decades. The fluorescent lights hummed softly. My heels echoed against the polished floor. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I needed to replace the batteries in my office clock. When I reached the conference room, the door was already open. 2 security guards stood just inside. My stomach dropped. Inside the room, Patricia Wilson, the head of Human Resources, sat at the far end of the table. Her posture was rigid, hands folded neatly in front of her, expression professionally blank. No greeting, no small talk. "Please sit," she said. The guards didn't move. I sat. Patricia slid a thick stack of papers across the table toward me. They made a soft, final sound when they stopped. Like a verdict. "These documents indicate," she said evenly, "that you've been involved in the systematic diversion of company shipments over the last 4 months." I stared at her. "I'm sorry, what?" She didn't blink. "Using your high-level security clearance, you diverted 53 shipments. Total value approximately $3.2 million. My ears rang. She continued speaking, words clinical, detached, as if she were discussing inventory discrepancies instead of my life. She pointed to timestamps, digital access logs, my name, my signature, warehouse entries logged at 3 a.m. "I wasn't there," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "I've never been there at those times. This is impossible." Patricia nodded as if she'd expected that response. "Security footage would normally confirm or deny your presence. Unfortunately, the cameras malfunctioned during each incident. Backup systems failed as well. Every incident." I felt my hands go cold. "This is fabricated," I said, louder now. "I want to see the footage. I want my lawyer." She finally looked at me then, not with concern, but with something close to irritation. "You have 2 options," she said. "You can resign effective immediately and sign a non-disclosure agreement, or the company will pursue criminal charges." I laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "You're threatening me." "I'm advising you," she corrected. "Grace is trying to spare your family unnecessary embarrassment." And then she said the words that broke something inside me. "Your son just opened his accounting practice, correct? A CPA with a mother convicted of corporate theft would raise concerns. And your daughter, pharmacy boards conduct background reviews. It would be unfortunate if her future were affected." I felt sick. They weren't just destroying me. They were holding my children hostage. "I didn't do this," I said, standing, "and I won't resign." Patricia nodded to the guards. "You're suspended, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." The walk through the office was the longest of my life. 47 people, my team, watched as 2 guards flanked me like I was dangerous. Karen was crying openly at her desk. Dennis from accounting couldn't meet my eyes. Others stared at their screens, suddenly fascinated by spreadsheets. No one spoke. By Tuesday morning, police were at my door. By Tuesday afternoon, I was in handcuffs in my own driveway. Neighbors watching from behind curtains, phones raised. By Wednesday, my name was poison. And that evening, at exactly 6 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text. Hope you enjoy your new life. You were always too small time for someone like me. Grace says hello, and thanks for making this easy. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an execution. Shock doesn't arrive the way movies portray it. There was no screaming, no collapse to the floor, just a hollow silence that settled inside me, heavy and absolute. After the police left, after they took my laptop, my phone, every device that had ever held a piece of my life, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the indentation where my coffee mug had always rested. The house felt unfamiliar, like I was trespassing in my own memories. I replayed Patricia's words again and again. Resign quietly. Think of your children. I kept asking myself the same question over and over, as if repetition might produce a different answer. What did I miss? Had I overlooked a report, trusted the wrong person, been careless with my access codes? I searched my mind relentlessly, combing through months of work, emails, late nights. But the truth stayed the same, no matter how I turned it. I hadn't done anything wrong. Emma called from her dorm, voice breaking. Mom, people are posting things, videos, saying you were arrested. I swallowed hard, forcing calm into my tone. It's a misunderstanding, sweetheart, I promise. The lie tasted bitter, but I couldn't let fear take root in her voice. Marcus tried calling too. I could hear him thinking through the situation even as I spoke, already mapping legal strategies, already angry in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. This isn't random, he said. This is surgical. That night, I barely slept. By Wednesday afternoon, emails started circulating. Integrity concerns. Ongoing investigation. Caldwell Logistics sent them to every major company in New England. My name became synonymous with fraud before I'd even stepped into a courtroom. My LinkedIn notifications exploded. Connections removing themselves, recommendations disappearing, people I'd mentored quietly erasing me from their professional history. 25 years of work evaporated in 25 hours. I hired a criminal defense attorney, Richard Chen, $500 an hour. Every invoice felt like bleeding money I didn't know how I'd replace. Grace's legal team buried us in paperwork, delays, motions, dragging everything out until exhaustion became strategy. By month 3, I lost the house. I sold my car, my furniture, my father's watch, one of the few things my mother had kept. Emma offered to quit school. I refused so sharply it startled both of us. I will not let them steal your future, too. Marcus offered a loan from his business. I said no. This was my fight. By the time I took a job delivering food, wearing a thin jacket with a restaurant logo stitched over the place where my identity used to be, I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired. Tired of hoping. Tired of explaining. Tired of believing justice worked the way it was supposed to. I told myself survival was enough. I didn't know yet that the story wasn't finished with me. Not even close. Survival has a way of shrinking your world. By the 4th month, my life had narrowed to 3 things. The sound of my alarm at 5:30 a.m., the smell of old oil in the Toyota Corolla I'd bought for $1,500, and the constant math running in my head. Gas, rent, food. Nothing else mattered. I delivered food 6 nights a week for Golden Dragon on the south side. Mr. Chen, the owner, didn't ask questions. He didn't Google my name. He just handed me the keys and said, "You show up, you work, you get paid. That's enough." I clung to that dignity like a lifeline, but the humiliation followed me everywhere. I delivered to former colleagues who wouldn't meet my eyes. They'd crack the door just enough to take the bag, mumble thanks, and shut it quickly, as if shame were contagious. I delivered to neighbors who used to wave from their porches, now suddenly fascinated by their phones. One night, I delivered to a woman named Carol, an old acquaintance from my marriage. She opened the door, stared at me for a full second, then laughed. Actually laughed. She pulled out her phone, recorded me while handing over a $20 bill, and said, loud enough for the camera, "Wow, you really fell far, didn't you?" She posted it to her social media. Someone sent it to me anonymously later. I watched it once, then deleted it. There was no point feeding the pain. Meanwhile, Grace's legal team kept tightening the screws. My lawyer stopped returning calls as quickly. Not out of malice, out of reality. I couldn't pay. The case stalled, buried under delays designed to drain me dry. Richard finally admitted it over coffee one afternoon, eyes tired. She's done this before, 3 times. Same pattern. None of them won. That was the moment something inside me went very quiet. I stopped imagining redemption, stopped picturing courtrooms where truth mattered. I focused on getting through the day. And then, on a rainy December night, the app pinged with one last delivery. 1,847 Riverside Drive. A wealthy neighborhood. Old money. Big houses with circular driveways and manicured hedges. The kind of place where tips were generous because no one noticed the amount. I needed that tip. The rain was relentless, cold, soaking through my thin jacket in seconds. I grabbed the insulated bag and ran to the front door, water dripping off my hair, shoes squelching with every step. When the door opened, an elderly man stared at me, and then he collapsed to his knees. For a split second, I thought he was having a heart attack. I dropped the bag and reached for my phone, panic flooding my chest. But he grabbed my arm, stronger than I expected, and looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. "Oh my God," he whispered. "You're Dorothy Mitchell's daughter." My breath caught. "Your eyes," he said, voice shaking. "That scar above your eyebrow. You look exactly like her." Exactly. No one had said my mother's name in years. He pulled me inside, past walls covered in old photographs, documents stacked in careful towers. He grabbed a framed photo and held it up between us. "This is your mother and me," he said softly. 1984, the day we signed the papers. The woman in the photo, young, determined, smiling, was unmistakably my mother. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about my life began to unravel. The rain kept falling outside, but inside that house, time felt suspended. I stood there, dripping water onto an expensive rug I didn't belong on, staring at a photograph that rewrote my past. My mother, young, alive, fierce in a way I'd only ever glimpsed in stories, stood beside the old man, now gripping my arm, like he was afraid I might disappear if he let go. "I'm Harrison," he said, voice trembling. "Harrison Drummond." The name meant nothing to me then. He led me into the living room, every surface crowded with history, black and white photographs, folders labeled by year, filing cabinets that lined an entire wall. This wasn't clutter, it was preservation, obsession born of waiting. He sat heavily on the couch, suddenly looking every one of his years. "Your mother and I built something together," he said. "Something she never told you about." My chest tightened. "She worked at the hospital," I said reflexively. "She raised me alone." "Yes," he nodded, "after she ran." The words stung. He told me how they'd met in the early 80s, 2 young people exhausted by other people's dreams. How they talked during lunch breaks about building something honest, something lasting. How they scraped together money they didn't have to buy a worthless stretch of swampland 30 miles outside the city. Everyone laughed at them. The zoning board rejected them. Environmental groups sued. Lawsuits piled up. Debt mounted. My mother thought she'd ruined her future. Then she disappeared. "She was 8 months pregnant," Harrison said quietly. "She lost everything, including faith." I felt my knees weaken. I sat. "She died thinking she'd failed," I whispered. Harrison's eyes filled. "She died before she could know the truth." That was the moment the weight of my life pressed down all at once. My mother's exhaustion, her fear of risk, her silence about the past. All of it made sense now. I thought about the foreclosure notice taped to my door, the Toyota that barely ran, the way my children looked at me, trying not to be afraid. I thought about Samuel's text, Grace's smirk. The machinery of power that had crushed me without hesitation. And for the first time in months, the pain wasn't just sharp. It was unbearable. I pressed my hands into my eyes, breath hitching. I hadn't cried like that since the police took my phone. Deep, silent sobs that shook my shoulders without sound. I felt broken, erased, small in a world that rewarded cruelty. I can't fix what's been done, I said hoarsely. They destroyed me. Harrison leaned forward, placing a folder gently on the table. No, he said. They thought they did. Inside the folder were documents, trust papers, decades of records, and a number so large it made my head spin. But in that moment, before power, before revenge, before justice, I felt only grief for the parents I never truly knew, for the life that had nearly buried me, for how close I came to disappearing. I was at my lowest point, and I had no idea I was standing at the edge of a door that was about to open. I didn't understand the documents at first. My eyes kept sliding off the numbers, my brain refusing to process them as real. Harrison waited patiently, hands folded, watching my face the way someone watches weather, knowing the storm had to pass before clarity could arrive. Take your time, he said gently. I've waited 30 years. I can wait a few more minutes. 30 years. I swallowed and forced myself to focus. The folder contained trust documents, dated just months after my mother vanished. My name, my full legal name, typed neatly where a beneficiary should be. Harrison had placed my mother's 50% ownership into an irrevocable trust, frozen in time, protected from creditors, lawsuits, even his own estate. I looked up at him, voice unsteady. Why? Because it was hers, he said simply, and because she believed in building things the right way, even when she was afraid. He showed me maps. What had once been marked as undevelopable wetlands was now the Riverside Technology Corridor, one of the most valuable commercial developments in the state. 47 office buildings, 2 shopping centers, data centers, distribution hubs, hospitals. The numbers stacked on top of each other until they stopped feeling like money and started feeling like gravity. Your mother's share, Harrison said quietly, is currently valued at $947 million. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the coffee table, breath shallow. That's not possible. It is, he replied, and there's more. He pulled out another folder, thinner but heavier in a different way. Lease agreements, tenant rosters, and there it was, Caldwell Logistics. My heart slammed against my ribs. Harrison nodded when he saw my expression. They've been our anchor tenant for 17 years. Their entire East Coast operation sits on our land. I flipped pages with trembling hands, signatures, dates, and then a clause highlighted in yellow. Integrity clause. Any tenant found engaging in fraud, harassment, or unethical business practices may be evicted with 30 days' notice. No appeal. I stared at the words, my pulse roaring in my ears. My mother insisted on that clause, Harrison said softly. She believed power without ethics was rot. We never removed it. Something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not vengeance. Clarity. For months I'd been reacting, surviving, absorbing blows, shrinking to fit the shape they forced me into. I'd let other people define who I was. And now, sitting there in a soaked delivery jacket, I realized something fundamental. They hadn't beaten me because I was weak. They'd beaten me because they thought I had no leverage. I looked up at Harrison, my voice steadier than I felt. Grace Caldwell destroyed my life. Yes, he said, and she did it while standing on your land. The weight of that settled slowly, deliberately. I don't want revenge, I said after a moment. I want the truth. Harrison smiled, not triumphantly, but with relief. Then you'll want to meet Rebecca Chen, best real estate litigator in the state. She's expecting your call tomorrow at 9. For the first time since my arrest, I felt something unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Not hope, agency. I stood, straightening my shoulders. Then I think it's time Grace Caldwell met her landlord. Harrison's smile widened. Your mother would have liked that. Outside, the rain had started to ease. Power doesn't announce itself with noise. It arrives quietly, through documents, deadlines, and consequences that can't be negotiated away. Rebecca Chen moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. Within a week, the courts verified the trust. Ownership was established. The leases were reviewed line by line. Every clause Grace's lawyers had once considered harmless suddenly became a locked door she couldn't open. "You don't just have leverage," Rebecca told me from her office overlooking the harbor. "You have a collapse button." Caldwell Logistics couldn't relocate without catastrophic losses. Hundreds of millions in equipment. Supply chains embedded into the property itself. Years of infrastructure that couldn't be duplicated on short notice. I sat in my dented Toyota outside Caldwell headquarters the next morning, watching people stream into the building I used to run. My phone rang. Samuel. I let it go to voicemail. His message was frantic, words tumbling over each other about lease issues and ownership confusion, and Grace's attorneys calling nonstop. He asked if I knew anything about it. I called him back, my voice calm to the point of boredom. "Tell Grace her landlord wants to discuss recent business practices. Conference room B, 1 hour." He laughed, high, brittle. "You deliver food. What landlord?" "Not anymore," I said. "And Samuel, that penthouse Grace bought you, also on our land, everything you can see from that balcony belongs to us." The meeting was surgical. I walked into the executive floor with 6 attorneys behind me. Grace's face shifted from confusion to fury to fear in less than a minute. Rebecca laid out the evidence, 19 sworn statements from employees terminated using the same fabricated pattern. Grace threatened, postured, blustered. Then the numbers were explained. 30 days to vacate or comply. Public exoneration, $25 million in damages. A new lease at 5 times the rate, and a marriage that suddenly became very expensive to maintain. Samuel backed away from the table. Within 48 hours, Grace's board forced her resignation. Divorce papers followed a week later. The story leaked. Not the genius CEO, but the woman who destroyed lives for sport. We compensated every employee she'd crushed. Karen cried on the phone. "You saved us." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. Healing didn't come with fireworks. It came quietly, like learning to breathe again after being underwater too long. I didn't move back into my old house. I didn't reclaim my old office. I didn't even stop delivering food right away. On Fridays, I still worked a short shift at Golden Dragon, not for the money, but because Mr. Chen had treated me like a human being when the world decided I wasn't one anymore. Samuel came once. He stood under the restaurant awning in the rain, mascara streaked, voice trembling. "I'm sorry," he said. "This went too far." I looked at the order slip in my hand. "You're sorry you lost," I replied calmly, "not for what you did." He had no answer. That was the last time I saw him. Harrison became family in the way blood sometimes fails to be. We spent long afternoons talking about my mother, her stubbornness, her fear, her principles. Together, we converted a third of Riverside into affordable housing. We established the Dorothy Mitchell Foundation with $100 million, focused on families one medical emergency away from collapse. Emma graduated debt-free. She now runs a community clinic, the kind my mother would have trusted. Marcus defends employees pro bono. He won his first major case 3 weeks after everything settled. And my granddaughter, Dorothy, will grow up knowing her family name doesn't mean dominance. It means integrity. Standing in my mother's old office, Harrison once said, "She died thinking she failed." I touched her photograph. She didn't. Here's the truth I learned the hard way. Sometimes you lose everything, not because you're weak, but because someone mistakes your decency for vulnerability. Sometimes people try to bury you and don't realize they're planting seeds. My mother left me more than wealth. She left me a compass. And when the world tried to erase me, it led me home.